Konfidas Cyber Bite, your bite-sized cyber updates from around the world. I'm Lauren Izso.
And I'm Ram Levi.
So in this first episode of Cyber Bite, we are trying to bring you the biggest cybersecurity headlines from around the world. Ram and I go way back. We've been working together for 5 or 6 years now, right, Ram? Something like that?
Something like that. Very long time and a very long friendship.
Very long friendship. I've interviewed Ram on the news many times, and we've worked together with Konfidas, producing cybersecurity simulations for a bunch of different companies. And like he said, we've been friends for many years as well. So I'm very lucky to be joined by Ram here to explain sort of what's going on behind the headlines when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, this show, this Cyber Bite, is really an experiment for me and Ram, and also for you. And we'd really appreciate any feedback you can send. Please comment. Let us know what you think we should focus on, what we shouldn't focus on, perhaps possible themes for next time. We'll be really, really happy to hear from you. So don't hesitate to comment and be in touch with us and give us feedback.
And if you have information regarding attacks, we'll be happy to know about them. So please share them with us.
Definitely. So obviously, if you're anything like me, probably like Ram, you've definitely been glued to your TV watching the news for the last couple of weeks, watching what's happening in Ukraine. Of course, Russia has invaded Ukraine. There's a lot going on. There's also a lot of going on in terms of cybersecurity news. You might hear anchors, reporters talking about different threats, different hacks that Russia is threatening, that Ukraine is threatening. There's lots of stories going on, and the people on the news might not necessarily understand exactly what's happening. So that's why we have Ram here to explain how this works, the damage that these attacks, that these threats could potentially cause, and how far this could go. Ram, why is this such an important part to understand what's going on in the war in Ukraine right now?
Well, for one thing, if you want to understand what's going on in the cyber world, you should be glued to Twitter, not the TV. There's a lot of information flowing on Twitter and also on some professional websites. And the problem with cyber attacks, it's not shells. You cannot see them. So you need some professional angle telling you what's right and what's wrong, what's actually happening. There's a lot of information that we get from the Israeli cybersecurity community that is actually participating both in protecting the Ukrainians and helping them improve their cybersecurity posture. So we see a lot of attacks, a lot of malwares and things that are going on. And we hear things from people that are on the ground, so we can actually check what's really happening.
Ram, what are some of the best sources that people should be looking at? You mentioned Twitter, not TV. So what kind of things can people be looking at to know that it's real accurate information coming through?
Well, those are two different things, but basically the most accurate information you'll get from the security vendors, like Microsoft Threat Intelligence, Mandiant, and other intelligence companies. They're actually, what they're doing is they're not telling you that there's been an attack. They're actually capturing and catching the malware. They're analyzing the malware. And based on the technical behavior of the malware, they can tell you what is happening. Some of those companies are in a lot of companies worldwide. So they can do an analysis where else they saw the malware. And based on some technical aspects, they can do attribution, meaning telling you based on technical evidence who they think is behind the attack because they've seen the technical fingerprints somewhere else. And that is really valuable.
Okay, so speaking of malware, I just want to break this down, for our viewers, those people watching that might not necessarily understand exactly what that means, what's going on here. So Russia has obviously, or at least in the news, they're talking about Russia threatening, cyber attacks against Ukraine. And that is a huge part of the conflict there. So can you break down for us what exactly Russia has been threatening against Ukraine and how much the conflict could possibly escalate because of these cyber threats?
Well, there are actually three major Russian threats, or I would say general nation states. When we speak about nation states, there are three major threats that we look at. The first one is destructive attacks that use malware. Malware is a malicious software. They use a software to penetrate into companies or national organizations. And then what they do is they delete the computers. So if they delete the computers, you cannot actually use them. So you cannot communicate. There are no emails. It takes a lot of time to recover from them. Sometimes it can take, based on our experience, between 2 and 3 weeks to recover from a malicious cyber attack.
So that could potentially sort of disrupt the entire infrastructure of giant organizations in Ukraine.
Those are disruptive attacks, and they're very dangerous. They happen a lot of times. The Russians are actually responsible for the most destructive attack in history, which started in Ukraine and propagated all over the world, which is one of the fears of the West right now, that this will happen again. The attack is called NotPetya, and they used it in 2017. And because it was a war, meaning it can propagate from computers in the same network, it propagated all over the world, and it caused a damage of about $10 billion, according to the Five Eyes, the five intelligence organizations of US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and UK. So that was a major attack. And the Russians are using the same types of attacks right now in Ukraine. They actually used them a lot before the invasion. During the invasion, we saw very few attacks. But I think we're going to see more attacks, especially attacks aiming into creating disinformation and creating fake news. For example, they're attacking websites, official websites of municipalities, and injecting fake stories into legitimate sites. Or they're hacking people's profiles. For example, they can hack your profile because you are considered to be a reliable journalist, and they can post on your behalf, and people might think that this is actually the truth. So
actually, it's funny you say that, because last week my Instagram profile was hacked, and obviously I don't know who was behind it, but it could be anybody. And just so you know, it gives sort of an example of that this can affect real people, everyday people. It's not necessarily government websites in Ukraine. It could be journalists like me. It could be cybersecurity experts like you. It literally could be anyone that's connected to this in some way.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Journalists that are reporting from Ukraine, they're not in their hometown. They get a lot of information. They click this information, and then the second thing they know is that someone took over their social network platforms. And I mean, speaking of, the Russians have capabilities like, I think, that are no lower than what we have in Israel and the US. And if you remember, there was a lot of hype with NSO, which is an Israeli intelligence company. And one of the big things that they were able to produce is what we call zero-click attacks. In a zero-click attack, you get a message, you don't do anything. There is actually no interaction with the user, and then they're inside the phone. So if the Russians would have a capability such as NSO, they could do zero-click attacks against Ukrainian officials, against international journalists, and using them to do two things. One, understand what they know, because people use their smartphones all the time. And that's a very valuable source of intelligence and information. If I know your sources, I know a lot of things that you will not put on TV. I know where you are. I know who you're speaking to. I know what you're about to do. And the second thing is use the access that they get to their phones, mobile phones and computers, and inject information and send it, and it looks really reliable. So you can use it to spread information, and you can actually use it to spread malware, which is even more dangerous.
Again, you know, as a journalist, protecting your sources is it could be life-threatening. It's something that's really the most important thing for journalists. So if a hacker is able to get that information and reveal my sources, especially in the middle of a conflict or a war, that could be extremely dangerous and definitely life-threatening for whose ever information is exposed in that. I do. And
they should do whatever they should do whatever they can to secure the digital assets. I know that Google is providing. There's a whole security program that Google is financing to help journalists and politicians secure themselves. They can just go online and use the free tools that Google is giving journalists and politicians. It's really helpful. I cannot stress enough how important that is.
Really good to know. Thank you for that, Ram. And I do want to get to, you know, the fake news aspect and this information war, as people have been calling it, in a second. But you mentioned, you know, how these kind of attacks could really, really escalate the situation. And I remember, Ram, in our very, very first meeting, the very first time I interviewed you, one of the questions I asked you, it's funny I'm saying this now, but could World War III be started by a cyber attack? And now that we're talking about this conflict, and a lot of people are saying that, you know, this war could potentially spread throughout Europe and eventually throughout the world and possibly lead to a giant, you know, World War III situation, God forbid, but who knows what could happen. Do you think a cyber attack could be something that could set that off rather than an explosion, a bomb, a missile, something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, if you do something that will get the other side angry enough to start a war, then the answer is yes. I mean, you can blow a building, you can murder someone, and you can attack a critical infrastructure. I mean, yes, the cyber option is on the table, no doubt about it. Whether the future world wars will be fought on cyber alone, I think the answer is no. I mean, we see it now in the invasion of Russia to Ukraine. Wars are being fought by tanks and troops on the ground, by fighter planes, by helicopters. Cyber is an addition to the war. It can create disinformation, disruption. You can cause a lot of chaos, but it's not the main issue. It's not the main issue in a war.
So we're talking a lot about, Russia threatening Ukraine, what Russia could do to Ukrainian infrastructure. But what about vice versa? We've seen Ukrainian officials posting on social media asking for individuals around the world who are supporting Ukraine. Of course, they're having individuals with military experience, fly to Ukraine and join the war on the ground. But they're also asking for people who understand cybersecurity and hacking to join them in hacking Russian infrastructure. So what is that looking like? And is that really having an effect on Russia at all?
Well, it's looking extremely interesting. Russia was always on the offensive side, and they were almost never the victim. Now is being attacked by dozens of hackers or hacking organizations from all over the world. I mean, the social movement called Anonymous, which we'll speak about it in a second, is saying that they've been, over the past couple of days, they hacked 2,500 Russian websites, including critical infrastructure, airport, banks. They also said that they've hacked Russian CCTV that the Russians put in Ukraine so they can monitor the movements of Ukrainians. There's been a major leakage from companies like Gazprom.
When you're saying that they're hacking them, how long are they able to take over their operations until Russia is able to get them back, is able to recover them? Is this sort of a long-term attack, or is it very quick?
If it's a disruptive attack, once the attack happened, then it's over. Now, what the victims or the companies that were hacked will do, they'll have to recover. It'll take them a few days at least. So it creates disruption. But if it's data leakage, then the horse has already run away. Then there's nothing you can do. And what Anonymous is saying is that they have leaked, information from Roscosmos, the Russian space agency. They've leaked information from Gazprom. But most interesting, they've leaked information regarding the Russian plan to invade Ukraine. And in this plan, which they approved in January, they were supposed to invade Ukraine on February 20th and be over with on March 6th. And today is March 6th, and they're not even close to being over with it. And that's interesting. Now, if you think about it, we haven't seen so many big successes from this movement called Anonymous. So I suspect that what's happening right now is that the West, nation-state hackers, are actually using this information and using the sponsorship of the idea of Anonymous to attack Russia and to spread this information saying they're anonymous. So the attacks will not attributed to the West, to countries from the West, and that will not escalate the war, because what can you do against an idea? Can you fight an idea? No, but you can fight a government. So that's what governments are doing.
So you're saying, like Western governments that are supporting Ukraine's cause, you're saying that they could be hiding behind this vigilante IT army that Ukraine is recruiting, like Anonymous, and they are actually behind some of the attacks on Russia. That could be a possibility.
Absolutely. The idea is to put a lot of pressure on Russia right now, financial pressure using sanctions, and digital pressure using cyber attacks. Spreading information from Russian organizations, disrupting them, making them feel that the idea to invade Ukraine and take over the company was a very bad idea, and that will hurt everyone.
So, Ram, you mentioned earlier when we were talking that there's also groups within Russia that are doing their best to fight these outside actors that have been hacking Russia. Obviously, all the sanctions and these hackers have really had a big impact on Russia. We've been hearing in the news how it's affecting Russians on the ground. So how are Russians fighting back?
Well, we do know that a lot of the cyber criminal groups were actually in Russia. I mean, most of them were not operating on behalf of the Russian government, but they were operating from
Allegedly.
Russia without, no. I mean, we know that there's a connection to the FSB, the Russian Secret Service, because there were leaks from those criminal organizations. But we do know that they were operating, and the Russians did not disrupt their operations. When we knew that they were operating from Russia, and there was almost nothing that the West could do. What happened now is we saw a split between those attacking groups. Some groups were Russian, so they stood behind the Russian government, with Russian patriotism, and some groups said, no, we're not part of it. We are Ukrainians. We're not going to fight you back. And we saw a huge leakage of ransomware criminal organizations. One of them is called Conti, one of the most notorious attacking groups. They've been attacking hospitals in the United States, shipping companies. I mean, they've been attacking everyone from ransomware. Based on the leaks, we saw that they've made in the last few years more than $2.8 billion just from ransomware. And now what we see is that all the attack tools are now out in the open. Communication between the hackers or the people that are working for Conti. We saw doxing, meaning people that are actually identifying the people behind Conti. So that's really interesting.
So who exactly are these groups targeting? Sorry to interrupt you, but yeah.
They're saying that they are saying that they are security analysts working that are supporting Ukraine. But then again, we don't know. It's very likely that now the West is using the environment that is happening in Russia in order to give a very big hit to those criminal organizations that were working without any limitations from Russia. Now it's a very good opportunity.
We also
saying that there are actually security analysts or there are cyber activists working for Ukraine. They'll never admit that they're the NSA or the US Cyber Command. Again, I don't know. But based on the ability that they are showing, which is very high, it's very likely that those are not just ordinary activists working on behalf of the idea of anonymous.
Right. And it's interesting because recently the US State Department warned that there could be cyber attacks from Russia against the United States. So even if that actually occurred, would the US government admit that these Russian groups were sort of fighting back against the US, possibly, a counter hack to an original hack that came from the United States? Is that something that is going to come out into the open, this sort of shadow war of hackers?
Well, there is a shadow wars of hackers right now. And what's more dangerous is once the tools of those hackers is being leaked, now everybody can use them. So now we see proliferation of cyber attack tools, which are actually very, very high level tools. They have managed to penetrate organizations all over the world. So people who are amateurs now have tools of the most notorious ransomware groups in Russia. That's very dangerous. That's very dangerous.
So we touched briefly on, this information war and all the fake news that's coming out. And one thing that's been, there's been a really good flow of information from journalists coming out of Ukraine, maybe less so from Russia. Of course, Russia passed a legislation a few days ago that says that there can't be any independent journalism, any independent reporting from within Russia. But in Ukraine, you see a lot of journalists on the ground. You can follow a lot of different people on social media that are giving constant updates of what's happening there. You really can see it with your own eyes. But my question is what happens if the internet in Ukraine is cut out? What if people aren't able to spread the information that they have been until now? What will happen to that, to the information and, the truth? Will the truth really be able to come out if nobody is able to publish it on the internet?
Well, first, the internet is cut off in some areas of Ukraine because you need electricity to have access to the internet. So in some areas that the Russians have taken over and where there is no electricity, at some point there is no internet. But I just want to say it's very hard to censor the internet, even though the Russians are trying to censor the internet and they're not allowing access to Facebook. Russians are on Facebook because they can use VPNs. There is a Facebook darknet side, dark web. I mean, you can access Facebook through the dark web, and that's very hard to stop. Instagram is not closed. So you can actually use Instagram in Russia. So they're not completely cut off from the internet. That's fake news by itself. But what we see efforts of companies like Elon Musk's Starlink to provide satellite internet. Although in the beginning of the invasion, we did see a huge cyber attack against a satellite communication company called Viasat. About 9,000 terminals were disrupted, which actually caused a huge influence and disruption of 3,000 electrical turbines in Germany. So Elon Musk is now providing satellite terminals of Starlink. He's also providing explanations on to how to safely secure them. He's saying himself that because they're now investing in anti-jamming and cybersecurity in SpaceX, which is the operator of Starlink, the version 2 of Starlink will be delayed. But Starlink is the only.
How exactly, if you could, yeah, go ahead.
It's the only internet access in Ukraine which is not controlled by the Russians. That's really interesting. And there's nothing they can do about it unless they decide that they're attacking the satellites of SpaceX, and they have about 1,500 satellites. It's not that easy. I mean, if they would attack satellites in low Earth orbit, physically attack them, that will influence the Russian satellites in low Earth orbit. It's very dangerous. I don't think that they're going to do it.
So how exactly does Starlink work? Can everyone in Ukraine connect to it? And I mean, there's nothing that the Russians can do from the ground to stop it. They have to physically attack the satellite in order for it not to work.
Well, there is. They can jam it. They can. The way that satellite communication works is that there are satellites. Usually, they would be in geostationary orbit, meaning far away, about 36,000 miles from Earth. But Starlink satellites are in low Earth orbit, which is about 500 kilometers from Earth. So that means that the latency, the time that it takes the network to go up and down, I mean, to space and back, is very, very low. That's why it's very fast and it's very low latency. The way it works is that there are about 1,500 satellites of Starlink, and you get a terminal with an antenna. The antenna looks towards the sky, and that's it. You got fast internet between 50 and 150 megabytes, which is quite fast, and that's all you need. Once you have that, you can connect and boom, you're online. No censorship. No one can tell you what to do. There are 3 ways, actually more or less 3 ways to attack those satellite internet terminals. One is you attack the terminal itself. You destroy it. 2, you cyber attack the terminal itself, like this is what happened to Viasat. Or you can jam the communication between the satellite and the terminal. It's hard to do because there are many satellites and they can move them from one satellite to another. You can jam the downlink, but then you would need an airplane in the sky, or it's more difficult. And besides, you need to have superiority in the air in order to do that, and that's something that the Russians currently don't have. So basically, Starlink is the best communication option now for the Ukrainians. But they need to use it, with safety in mind.
Is Starlink or, satellite-based internet connection, is that really common around the world, or is that something that's fairly new?
It's common in rural areas, in areas where you don't have 5G or terrestrial communications, like in Africa or in areas in the US or in Canada, they're so big that you don't have any satellite or any cellular reception.
Thank you for including Canada, by the way.
Well, I love Canada. I used to live in Canada, so I love Canada myself.
Me too.
Montreal is in my heart. But yeah, but since what Elon Musk is giving us, with Starlink, is not only accessible in terms of price, but it's fast. So it's fast, accessible internet connection. He wants to allow everyone all over the world to connect to the internet, and that's something that is actually going to happen.
Well, maybe we can have a future episode specifically on satellite-based internet connection and Elon Musk. Maybe we can get him on the show. Maybe, I don't know. We'll try.
I'm inviting Elon Musk to participate in Cyber Bite. We'll be more than happy to host you.
But I just want to ask you one more question, Ram. This shadow hacker war, as we called it, have we seen anything on this level before, or is this conflict changing the game of these cyber threats?
Well, cyber has always been in the shadows. You cannot see it, you cannot feel it. All of a sudden, something doesn't work. So it has always been in the shadow. And there's, we always say that there are so many cyber attacks that people just don't notice them. But what's happening now with Russia and Ukraine is by far, in scale, the biggest we've ever seen. And I'm afraid that it might get out of control. So we gotta really be worried about it and make sure that at least we here in the West, in Israel, in the US, in Europe, in Canada, are doing what we can to protect ourselves. So we are not victims of this war that we're not part of.
Absolutely. And that's why, I'm so glad that we were able to create this show together so that we can really explain the level of the threat going on here, and how this conflict could escalate based on cyber as well as based on what's happening on the ground. But there are a lot of, cybersecurity threats to consider here. So Ram, thank you so much for explaining this to me and everybody that's watching. We really hope that you guys enjoyed Cyber Bite, our very first episode. If you have any comments, please comment them below, or, send me a message, send Ram a message. We really want to know what you think and what you want to see on future programs. Ram, do you have anything to add?
Just want to say thank you very much. You're a great friend, and I love interviewing with you.
Of course. And if you want any other information, you can check out the Konfidas website. Ram, what is the website?
Konfidas.com with a K.
Check out Konfidas.com. We'll put it in the link with this broadcast, so you can, directly go to it and get all the information you might have missed. And please join us next time for our second edition of Cyber Bite. Maybe we'll have Elon Musk or some other really awesome guests. I don't know. We'll see. Depends what you guys want. So tell us what you want, and we're really excited to see you next time.
Bye-bye.